Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Ashley Robinson. I'm the editor of the Alberta Seed Guide, and I'll be acting as your host for this episode. On today's episode of Seed Speaks, we are going to talk about irrigation and the effect it can have on crops. We have a few guests here to join us today to discuss this, so thank you to Clint Pickard and Josh Mosier for joining us. And unfortunately, we were supposed to have Leonard Hingley with Alberta Agriculture, Forestry, and Rural Economic Development, but he's unable to now. So I would just like to say a quick thank you to him, and hopefully we can have him on here to chat with us another time. And to those watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our guests in the chat box. And let's get started with getting to know our panelists. So Clint, could you tell me a bit more about your work at Corteva?
Yeah, thank you for having us. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Clint Pickard. I work at Corteva Agriscience. I've been here for about 13 years, and I am the global field digital lead in seed operations. And so I really focus on helping our teams produce high quality seed products that we sell to our customers. And specifically what we do is focus on what we like to call decision agronomy through digital tools. So using all of the different sensors, softwares, and systems that can help us achieve better yield, better quality, and manage our cost accordingly. So that's kind of what I do. And again, just really focused on growing those high quality seed products.
Thank you. And Josh, can you tell me a bit more about Komet Irrigation, what your job is there?
My name is Josh Mosier, and I'm the general manager and director of technical sales for Komet Irrigation. We're a manufacturer of sprinkler products that work specifically with the mechanized ag industry, so center pivots and traveler industries. We're a distributor of products all over the world. We really focus a lot on education and educating growers and distributors on how water application works and in the field environment and how to tie the correct products to it.
Thank you. And let's start a discussion. So first off, Clint, can you tell me a bit more about the role irrigation has in the seed industry and what seed crops we usually see it used on?
Yeah, absolutely. So in seed production at Corteva, our highest responsibility is just to be a reliable supplier. So, we do need to manage our costs and maintain having high yields and being that industry leader in quality. But if growers can't get a hold of our seed, they don't get a crop, right? So it's kind of like right product, right acre at the right time. Those are kind of the things that we really intensely focus on, and reliability is our top mission. We just have one chance every year to get that right for our growers. And so when we see our seed customers, the commercial farmers, they often have some of those same priorities. They want to maintain high yields and be reliable themselves, but they're dealing with the same productivity concerns in their commercial fields as we are in our production fields. So I think we have a lot of shared priorities when it comes to water and the availability of water. Generally, we think of water, whether it's provided by the weather or provided by irrigation, as being at that very base of the yield pyramid. So insanely critical to yield. That old mantra of rain makes grain it's absolutely the case. It's true. So no matter the environment, our grower partners and our seed production teams and our seed reps, they're all going to sleep a little bit easier knowing that there's irrigation out there and there's kind of that safety net on our production field, so we can maintain being a reliable supplier even if it turns hot and dry. I guess the other role that's increasing when we think about irrigation in the seed industry is that we want to be as efficient as possible with those irrigation resources. So there's a lot of risks that come with too much water. That's higher growing costs. That's maybe more variability. There's disease and quality issues to consider as well. So I think in seed production, what we're really looking for is that perfect balance where crops have just enough, just what they need for that growth and reproduction and make a quality seed product. But we haven't over applied and we haven't wasted. I think we're always looking for those opportunities where we can partner with our growers to, manage the access and application costs as best we can, save the water for the future seasons and make sure that we're just being good stewards of the environment. And as far as your last question, seed crops that we see irrigation on, I to be honest, I haven't seen a crop crop that hasn't been where. It seems like it can be used in almost any crop, but we really focus on the hybrid crops. So your corn, your sunflower, your sorghum, those are your hybrid crops. And generally we have a lot of pressure when it comes to that reproductive cycle and that sensitivity during the pollination period. And so we think about irrigation probably more in those crops, but I've seen it in everything.
Thanks. And Josh, irrigation booms and nozzles have changed so much over the years. Can you tell me about why these improvements are important?
Well, the improvements that we've seen, especially in the last 15 to 20 years, have really improved the productivity of the farmer, but also improved the bottom line of the farmer as far as their on the input side of it. What we're talking about, 25 years ago, most center pivots out there were, you had to go to the field and check everything every day, twice a day, if not more, and redo, make adjustments. Now all of that is available, with technology. You can do that from your phone, or from a laptop, from a computer. So just being able to manage the irrigation systems remotely is huge. GPS guidance. We don't have to deal with a lot of the infrastructure that we used to have, with other means of guidance for the systems. And then when it comes to the nozzle side of it, the improvements in the sprinklers in the last 5 to 10 years has been tremendous. We've moved from the older higher pressure impacts or the lower pressure sprays, which have been notoriously inefficient at getting the water to the root zone, to more efficient droplet type devices that really distribute the water very, very evenly across the field, the entire length of the system. But they also are helping to ensure that water is getting into the root zone where it needs to be. We're also seeing a lot of technology developments just on the monitoring side of things. So as far as monitoring soil moisture and things like that. So all of these add up to reducing inputs to the grower, because we're working at much lower pressures now. In a lot of cases, we're working with less flow because the products out there are much more efficient at getting that water to the plant. So we're able to conserve those resources too, but also conserve the inputs that the growers have. So all in all, it really has added up to a farmer being able to do more with a lot less.
Thank you. And my next question, I think Clint gave a bit of information about this. So maybe I'll first ask it to you, Josh, and then Clint, you can come in after if you have any extra comments. So why is irrigation so important, and what effect, why is irrigation so important, and what effect do dry conditions have on plants?
Really, I mean, the plant, once you put it under stress, you're going to reduce yield. So making sure that the plant has enough water, available water, is critical to finalizing the yield on that plant. And the timing is very critical too. So, when we look at the weather patterns, especially what we've seen lately, but historically as well, it never seems to rain when it's supposed to. So when we get into those critical crop phases of pollination and filling the whatever, the ear, the head, those are the times where we really need to pay attention to the watering cycle. And so if it gets to be dry during any of those time periods, the yield is going to suffer, and therefore the revenue for the farmer and just the production in general.
Thank you. And Clint, do you have anything to add on there?
Yeah, I suppose I can give you the seed perspective. So we really focus on that pollination period, and that's kind of our most critical risk time during the season in that seed production cycle. So we're trying to prepare fields to avoid that pollination stress as much as we can, and try to front load that part of the season. So you have that silking and pollen shed period, and that's like crunch time. But then you have everything that's leading up to that. So you have The pre-planting watering is certainly important in some environments. Establishing a good stand. Sometimes we get dry when the corn is very, very young. And even maintaining that uniform vegetative growth. I mean, you never know when the dry period is going to strike, but you need to be front loading that crop, especially in corn, to make sure that you're off to a good start and you're leading up to nice, healthy, uniform fields into that pollination period. And all of these can be managed, obviously, by applying irrigation technology. I think another thing to consider when we talk about seed production and dry conditions on plants is the fact that we use inbred materials in a production field. So we cross two inbreds generally to make a hybrid for that high quality output seed. And we don't always get the same benefit of defensive agronomic traits. These inbreds they're built different. And there's no two of them that are the same. So we can see that heat stress manifest in odd ways in these inbred materials. So we can see, lack of silks or tassels drying up or a non-uniform grain fill, things like that. And so, again, those are things that we look for and try to manage around and try to use our irrigation technology proactively to get in front of. So yeah, that heat stress on those inbreds can cause a lot of issues, and it can also compound the lack of any other defensive traits that the inbred might have. So we may see things that are not specifically related to drought stress. They may be disease related, but they're caused by the lack of water. So those are just some things that we think about when we think about what we need to worry about from a dry plant condition standpoint.
Thanks, Clint. And I think that plays into the next question I want to ask. I know we were chatting just before we went live about how you guys have been having some dry conditions where you are located there in Iowa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so you were also just talking there about really heat stress and stuff. So we've been seeing a lot more wilder weather events, I feel, the last few years. We've been seeing those kind of more extremes where we might have seen moderates in the past. So is irrigation becoming more important to agriculture as we see some of these wild weather events? And I'll just let whoever want to go first.
I mean, I could say that irrigation has been important to farmers and agriculture for a very long time, but it certainly is a hotter topic within ag. I think the general public is taking greater interest in it as well. And I think you see those global markets, the grain markets, are playing that and keying in on the weather events and water access, probably like they never have before. So I agree, our weather is becoming more wild, but I kind of look at it from the technology standpoint and totally agree with some of the things that Josh mentioned. The technology, I'm seeing more wild innovation on the technology side, and I'm excited with our ability to, kind of control and use this technology to our advantage when we have these extreme weather changes. So you got a lot of stuff coming online. You have drip irrigation. You got more growers taking on variable rate applications. I was just at Farm Progress last week and saw more things that would be kind of in the robotics space when it comes to irrigation. So these are all emerging and being adopted by those leading edge farmers. So I think you take a look at that, and then you take a look at some of the software capabilities or the insight capabilities that we have, getting more predictive with weather, using remote sensing to our advantage. That can really tell us how to manage within the wild weather events, right? So we can zero in. So if we only have a certain amount of resources or focus to spend, where is that time going to be most rewarding or most valuable? So which we may look at which fields are going to be the most stressed, where can we do the most work with some additional watering. So I'm just excited. I think we have to manage the complexity of our environment by using that mountain of data and the emerging technology that's coming online.
Those are all really great points. And I think Josh can definitely have some more to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The technology has advanced to a state now where, we can see, in real time, where everything is in the field from the bottom of the root zone, all the way to the flow meter at the well. But if you look at, looking at the wild weather events, I mean, that's, I'm right next door in Nebraska, and it's been absolutely crazy over here this year too, but it is all the way across. I mean, if you look at North America from the east to the west, it typically gets much drier. To the fact that, irrigation in the West is needed to even produce a crop. I mean, in most years, you wouldn't even get a crop without irrigation. Same goes for South Central United States. I mean, we look at systems there where they've literally had 3 inches of moisture from August last year to August of this year. 3 inches of rain. So without irrigation, there is no crop to be grown there. And we're seeing that spread across, it's spreading north, as we, historically look at that Texas area. They used to have kind of rains that we have now up here, and that's moving north. So, I mean, the drought conditions are going to continue to get worse. But the timing is really what's critical. And, even in the eastern part of North America, where you typically get good rain, it may not happen for the 3 weeks during the pollination period. And then, at that point, your crop is lost. So irrigation, supplemental irrigation, all the way through required irrigation is really going to be necessary moving forward.
Thanks. And I think that really plays into the next question I want to ask. We're talking about how important irrigation is becoming as we're seeing drier conditions. But what about if we start to see some of those irrigation systems, the sources of them, dry up or not be able to get access to that water? Because I know I'm located up in Manitoba, and last year we had a pretty dry growing season, and some of the irrigation reservoirs dried up during the growing season. So are there ways to, is this a concern, and are there ways to mitigate it from happening in the future?
There's definitely a concern. I mean, really what it comes down to is we should have started doing the conservation efforts that we're doing now as far as water application goes. We should have started doing that 30 years ago. With the wild weather, also just in areas where they're using groundwater, those groundwater reservoirs are being depleted as well. And the key to being able to move forward is to be able to use that water as efficiently as possible, not overwatering, not adding extra water when it doesn't need to be applied and can't actually be utilized by the plant. So again, coming back to the technology of water application devices, being able to get the water into the soil initially, but also being able to monitor how much water is in the soil, not watering when we don't need to water. All of those things combined will help in the future being able to conserve that and to spread that water over a larger area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if it's a new concern. I think everyone's just slowly realizing it's a fact. We're going to be limited on water supply, and that's either going to be limited by your environment or your government or both. And I think you're absolutely right on track, Josh, where we gotta mitigate this just by doing more with less. So what I see is there's application technologies that are definitely worth looking at and investing in. Drip irrigation is one that we're really strongly taking a look at in some of those more severely limited water supply situations. I think even simple things like drop nozzles on center pivots is just anything to get the water closer to the root zone, brings that water use efficiency number up, and it helps from an economic standpoint from the grower's perspective, but it's also just good for that maintenance of the environment as well. So, the technology piece, the application methods is huge, but then I think the other piece that you mentioned, Josh, is kind of what I consider the data science piece. So really, we have to do better as an industry to provide answers to growers on when and how much to water. And I think you do that by kind of looking at a supply and demand equation, right? So you need to be able to implement either direct sensors in the field or remote sensing to try to determine what your demand for the crop is. And I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. But if we can, what we're investing our time in is looking at evapotranspiration demand. And I think if you can tell a grower how thirsty the corn is or how much water it's expecting to grow to meet your yield target, then the rest of the equation is very simple. You simply add up what your supply is. So that either came from the irrigation that you provided or the rain that Mother Nature provided. And so the difference of that is how much is left. That's how much your corn needs to grow. And so I think we can do a lot to boil it down into a simple insight for growers as the year unfolds and changes. But we got to be thinking about answering that question of how much and when, and that'll help our growers be more efficient.
And that brings up a good point too, just on the education side. Educating growers, I think, is a task that we all need to, from the industry standpoint, be able to provide. Is that education as to how and when, how much. There's a study that was done fairly recently, 2 or 3 years ago, that said one of the most common scheduling methods, I think, was up to between 10 and 15% of growers still schedule by when their neighbor turns on their irrigation system. No actual data being looked at, not even going out into the field to just see if the crop is dry. It's just, if the neighbor turns on their pivot, we're going to turn on our pivot. Getting beyond that, I think, is really going to be crucial going forward. Scheduling is a huge part of it. I mean, the application side of it, yes, we have to be able to apply the water effectively. We have to be able to get the water into the root zone, but we also have to be able to know when the plant needs it. Like you said, Clint, understanding evapotranspiration in its most basic form, I still think is, beyond some of the growers that are out there.
Thanks. You guys have really great points there. And you actually started answering an audience question we had there from Alex Martin Hunt, asking about, do you have any advice for a grower looking to get more sustainable and be a better steward when it comes to irrigation? And I'll add on to that. Are there any resources that you guys would recommend for growers or anyone listening to go check out if they're looking for more information on how to be able to do some of those things that you guys have mentioned before?
Your local water conservation districts, some areas. I know, Josh, Nebraska, you have water management boards, which are very helpful as well. I think those are great places to start. Your university extensions are going to be great resources for that as well. University of Nebraska is a great one that I use still to this day, because they're out there doing the trials and doing the research, and they're finding out which technologies are working. They're working directly with suppliers and innovators in that space. And so I think you can jump ahead a little bit by leveraging some of the experience and expertise that those groups have.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, go local, keep it local. Talking to your local extension agents in the field. I wish Leonard would have been on here. That he would have been a good resource for this too. But those are going to be the folks that are going to give you the data that you need for your area, especially when it comes to the evapotranspiration, daily use rates for your local crops, but also just being able to teach on how to schedule, even at the very simplest, taking a shovel out in the field and seeing how much water you have in your root zone type of a scenario, even without all the technology of soil moisture probes and things like that. But that's one of the things to become more efficient. Really do kind of look at that technology too. There's a fair amount of soil moisture probe companies out there that are doing really good work as far as being able to provide you real data, real-time data in the field as to how much water is in the root zone, and you can calculate the evapotranspiration being used, or work with a local agronomist or extension agent to know how much the crop is being used at that point, or how much water the crop is using at that point, to be able to work on your scheduling. And that's really the basis for it. And again, going through and maintaining systems. This is another thing that I was going to bring up earlier, is making sure you maintain those irrigation systems. I can take you to, dozens of systems locally here around me that are operating at maybe 60% efficiency because the infrastructure is old, the sprinklers are old, it's old technology. Update those, keep everything up to date, and make sure that the water application devices on your machines are working well. And even in the drip scenario, making sure that you're maintaining that drip system. One of the most inefficient irrigation systems out there is a drip system that hasn't been maintained. So maintenance is also very much key in keeping up to date on the most recent technologies.
Thanks. And I think that plays into the next question I want to ask. You guys were talking about their maintenance and you're saying about all these different technologies. So when we're looking at them, I know irrigation's expensive to do. Sometimes you have to do different costs with water and stuff, but just the equipment and stuff. So does it really pay off to, when we're looking at the final returns and stuff that you're going to get on that seed crop or on that commercial crop that you're growing, does it really pay off to do all these different things with irrigation?
Well, I would say from a seed perspective, it does. We generally select for fields. We do have dryland fields, but we select more irrigated fields because of that reliability piece that I mentioned earlier. Josh, you touched on there's areas that irrigation is just an absolute necessity. So I think the answer is quite obvious there that, yeah, it probably pencils out in those areas to have a well-maintained and well-managed irrigation system. But we even see advantages in really non-water limited areas where we have irrigation. So some of it is just the timing of the weather that we touched on earlier. Sometimes it's just not raining when you need it to, but I think we see some agronomic benefits in having the ability to water in these, there's various critical times of the year, so if your soil is very dry and you're getting ready to plant that field, it may be preferred to have just a little bit of moisture in there to get things started. Same goes for when you have some of those crusting conditions or you're really having trouble with emergence, the plant's getting out of the ground. That post-planting watering can be really advantageous as well. And then we've already covered the pollination period, but that's critical to be able to de-stress in those times. The other thing I wanted to mention is just that it's really not just a financial investment. It's also it's a significant investment of time and potentially more labor needed on your farm. And so I'm not saying that to deter anybody from investing in irrigation equipment, but I think it is something that needs to be factored into the equation and considered before jumping in if you haven't had experience with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And coming from, I grew up on a farm that was flood irrigated. When you talk about the labor aspect, I grew up on a farm that was flood irrigated, and that's pretty much all we did all summer long was manage that irrigation. We really didn't have time for anything else. But with, some of the modern technologies out there, that investment is a huge savings in time, being able to cover a lot more ground with a lot less time, a lot more resources. A lot less resources. The other thing to look at too, as far as the irrigation system itself is also proficient at doing other things. You look at chemigation and fertigation, being able to apply fertilizers and chemical throughout the year. You can do that through a highly efficient mechanized irrigation system. So that's another way to spoon feed the crop, to be able to control, certain pests and, running fungicides through things like that. I mean, you also have to look at it as a tool, not just for irrigation, but also for being able to manage those other aspects of applying chemical and fertilizer too. So something else to consider.
Thanks, guys. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. We've had such a great conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys had a good time talking there.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Nice to meet you, Josh.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah, and thank you both for being here. And for those watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed part of today's live stream, don't worry. We'll have it available on demand on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions about this subject or ideas for future topics we should tackle, please send me a message to Seed World's Facebook page or feel free to reach out to myself. And next week, my colleague Alex Martin will have some guests on to chat about seed sampling and seed testing. We hope you'll join us. Thanks, and see you next week.